Hello, my name is Blaziken, and welcome to my Shenhe video. In this video, I'll be talking about Shenhe, her role, her teams, and of course, whether or not you should pull for her. So yeah, with that being said, stay tuned, and let's just jump right into it. Okay, so starting off with her builds here. For weapons, Calamity Queller is by far her best option. If you don't have it, that's fine, but you should basically be using something with as much attack as you can possibly get, and that's really all that you need. Attack is the most important thing, because she's passing it, so yeah, it's pretty good. The other 5-star options are all fine, honestly. Even Engulfing Lightning's decent, you know. You're going to want a little bit of ER, this gives you a little bit of base attack, and of course, the attack percent from the actual passive, and yeah, it's pretty decent. Outside of that though, other weapons that you can use for 4 stars, Favonius has a pretty high base attack, so that's always a decent option. Other than Favonius, I don't know, there's not too many amazing 4-star options just because their base attack is lower than the 5-star options, so yeah, definitely want to go for the 5-star options. Base attack's pretty nice to have on her. Artifacts, 2 Glad, 2 Shimenawa is definitely the way to go. You can kind of consider Noblesse, but the damage passing from Noblesse is going to be lower than the damage passing from Shimenawa's and Glad. And the big thing is that Noblesse is more consistent, but Glad and Shimenawa will give you the bigger numbers, and it kind of evens out to where Glad plus Shimenawa is going to be better than Noblesse. Especially since, generally speaking, if you're using Calamity Queller especially, Shenhe is going to have the higher base attack, and that's going to pass in more attack with higher talent levels, so yeah. Outside of that, of course, you're going to be going for the attack percent on basically everything. Right, attack percent Circlet, Goblet, and Sands, and just stack as much attack percent as you can, and you do want a little bit of ER, because her burst is pretty important, so you need like, I don't know, 70-80% ER, 170-180% ER. So if you can't hit that, then it's going to be a lot rougher, but that's kind of what you want to do. Is it worth it sacrificing, you know, a Sands for ER? It's hard to say, but it could be, depending on how your rotations are. Something I should mention really quickly that I forgot about is that you can actually also run Shenhe as a sub DPS, I suppose. I don't think it's anywhere near as good. I don't think you should be doing this, mostly because the cryo DPS in the game are just so strong, it's difficult to really justify, you know, screwing her support role over as a sub DPS instead. So you could run it, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's possible. You know, it depends on what you want to do, but you know, Blizzard Strayer's there, Noblesse is there, Glad, Shimenawa, it's all there. All the tools to make her hit harder on her E and her Q especially are all there, so you know, you just have to decide which one works best for your team, whether you're using freeze comps that you're going for Blizzard Strayer, or you're using melt comps or whatever, so maybe you need more EM or burst damage bonus, whatever it may be. It's up to you, but just saying, I would run her as a support, honestly. Talent-wise, of course, her skill and burst are both really important. Her burst is less important because the only thing that this really helps with is the extra shred, and the shred is pretty small per level, so this is nowhere near as important as the skill, so you definitely want to go with the skill first. But generally speaking, leveling these up is not the most important thing. The most important, most impactful buffs that she's going to give are from her talents, right? So her Ascension talents, these are going to give the most buffs, so that's really the most important thing, but the talents definitely help out a lot. So yeah, with that being said, let's just continue on to the teams then. So, starting off with a couple of disclaimers, my Ayaka and Ganyu are both C6, so I'm dealing a little bit more damage than a normal person would be. I can't really play around Ayaka C6 honestly, it's just not possible. All of her constellations are kind of integral to her kit, including her charge attacks, so not really any way for me to play around that. Ganyu though, I do hold my charge shot after I use flowers for enough time to normally charge it up. There may be 1 or 2 instances where I release a little bit early, but that's generally going to be fine because most of the time I'm actually releasing it late, so you know, it kind of makes up for it a little bit. Talking about Shenhe comps, honestly speaking, they were a little bit more difficult for me to play than the Morgana comps. And that's, very possibly just because I'm not used to the Shenhe rotations and I'm much more used to playing Morgana. So, if I'm playing Shenhe terribly, please just leave it in the comments below and, you can yell at me there, But it was definitely more difficult for me, and I'll explain why that might be the case, but we'll see. But there's something to note that I might need to aim my Ganyu charge shots on the ground and make sure only the bloom hits the enemies, but I don't think that's too relevant, but that's definitely something that could be improved. Okay, so talking about Shenhe in particular, she is a pretty strong cryo support. I do think that for most of the cryo DPS right now, it's a little bit awkward to build teams around Shenhe. The normal teams of Mona and Kazuha and Diona don't really work with her. So you kind of have to overhaul the team a little bit. And I think that Kokomi is pretty important for Shenhe teams. She's just, a Hydra healer that actually has decent Hydra application. When it comes to characters like Barbara, it's annoying to apply freeze with Barbara because you need to be in melee range all the time. And Xingqiu is pretty decent, but doesn't work with Ganyu basically, right? It's super annoying with Ganyu, like terrible. Works with Ayaka, but he's not a great healer, so, it's pretty annoying to play Xingqiu. And of course the real question is that, is she really better than Kazuha and Mona, right? And I think that the answer is not really, but I think that the Shenhe comps are pretty similar in power, which means that if you don't have Mona, then suddenly Shenhe is a lot more appealing, right? And of course, Kazuha, if you don't have him, I would probably save for him, he's next in line for reruns, honestly, right? If you look at the characters that have been rerun already, Kazuha is like the oldest character that hasn't been rerun, so, I think if you don't have Kazuha, you should probably just be saving for him, but if you can get both, that's fine probably as well. And of course, there's one more comp that I haven't talked about, of course. We've been doing a lot of Morgana type stuff, right, freeze comps, but I haven't talked about melt comps. And the problem with melt comps is that, I don't know, I think Shenhe's a little bit awkward on the melt comps because her burst just hits a bunch of cryo, and that just means that, you could have problems melting and stuff. It is a little bit awkward. Now, something to note is that my ER is not up to par, right? So I don't have her burst up all the time, which is problematic. But I did try out an ER build, right? ER Sands. And honestly speaking, it wasn't much faster. And that could just be because my rotations are terrible, so I'm not utilizing it enough. But for me, it wasn't much faster, so I just decided to go with the attack percent one and just show off the bigger numbers. But yeah, something to note is that indeed the attack is not as crazy as it seems, right? It's a flat pass in, so if you're not using like Calamity Queller, you're only really passing in like 3,000 damage, but that 3,000 damage is of course modified by another buff, right? The cryo damage bonus, the normal charge attack bonus, the elemental skill, the burst bonus, and of course the cryo shred. All of that increases that, so it is more than just like the 3,000 you're passing in, or if you have Calamity Queller, you could be passing in like 6,000 damage, right? And yeah, other than that, it's kind of important that you're using the correct damage type, right? So if you're holding Shenhe's E, you should be using your normal and charge attacks. If you're not holding, then you should be using your skills and burst to deal damage, so you can get that extra little damage increase on her attack pass. So it really does seem that Shenhe's pretty competent, right? She seems to pretty much be as good as the traditional Morgana comps, but something to note is that Shenhe is much more high investment than these other supports are, right? Kazuha's super low investment, but I'm using Kazuha on both teams, so it doesn't really matter. But Mona is a lot lower investment, right? You just need to level up Mona's burst, whereas Shenhe, you kind of need to level up both her elemental skill and her elemental burst, and then on top of that, you also have to get a bunch of attack percent on your artifacts, and then you need 5-star weapons to really take advantage of her. It's quite a bit of investment compared to Mona, who, for me, I'm just using, you could use Throwing Tails, right? I'm using Favonius, so I actually need to build crit rate, but you don't have to, right? You can just use the Throwing Tails and you don't need to build anything other than ER. And then of course you need to build her burst. But it's really just, Shenhe has much higher investment and a little bit more whale. She's able to provide the same level of support, I would say, as these other characters, especially for Cryo, well, only for Cryo. But the investment required is much higher for Shenhe than it is like these other supports, right? Including BENNET. And that's, for people who are pushing Abyss, that's not very good. Now, of course, if you're in the late game and the end game and you have all these resources on hand, then it doesn't matter. But when you're earlier, you really want the lower investment supports rather than these higher investment supports, because it's going to take away from your investment on your DPS, and it's going to take longer for you to get to a point where you're able to beat Abyss and whatever content you want to actually beat, right? So yeah, because of that, there's a lot of problems with Shenhe. Now, in terms of the raw numbers, Shenhe can give you larger hits, but do recall that there's a lot of downtime, right? For example, if you're fighting a ton of enemies, right, and you're using Ganyu, for Ayaka there's a ton of downtime regardless, but for Ganyu, you're going to hit them, right? And if there's 2 enemies, then, a single hit on Ganyu's burst plus 2 charge attacks is already all of your quills gone. So that's pretty rough. You're gonna only be buffing like half your attacks with quills at that point. And that's why, even though you're gonna get the higher numbers, you're also gonna get lower numbers after the quills are gone, and it kind of evens out into pretty similar damage to Morgana comps. And because of that, I don't like the Shenhe comps as much. I don't think there's actually any real large damage increase, if any at all. And I think Diona's more, I don't know, she's a lot easier to use than Kokomi, mostly because Diona gives a shield, but for Ganyu is pretty relevant. For Ayaka is much less relevant, but for Ganyu that shield's really nice. And of course, here's the biggest thing. Diona gives, well, she has access to 4 noblesse, right? Which nobody on the Shenhe comp really wants to run, right? You can run 4 noblesse on Shenhe, that's like fine, I guess, but you kind of just want to run the attack percent, right? And because of that, it's really awkward. The Shenhe comps don't have a 4 noblesse user, which means that there's actually a bit of damage loss there. And that's also what allows the Morgana comps to kind of bridge the gap here. That 4 noblesse is really nice. So yeah, that's something to mention. Another thing to mention is that I'm actually using Throwing Tails on my Kokomi. So I'm not even using Throwing Tails on my Morgana comps. So yeah, I'm getting a little bit less damage actually. So something to mention. So there is one more cryo DPS I have not mentioned, right? I've talked about Ayaka, I've talked about Ganyu. Chongyun still exists, which, to be fair, he hits pretty hard, right? I tested the Chongyun comps out. He hits really hard, right? The normal, Chongyun, Shenhe, Sucrose, BENNET comps. And there's a problem though. I think that currently Chongyun's just not great for Abyss. The mobs are just, they split up too much, they're too mobile, they move around, and you can't really get a fantastic grouping for Chong's burst, and that hurts him a ton. So he's good in terms of damage, but I think that practically speaking, running him is pretty tough in Abyss, and that's probably going to be the case for a while. So, just be careful. Chongyun is cool. I think he has a lot of potential, but I don't think he's quite there at the moment. So, if I'm being honest, I just think that the normal Mona, Kazuha, Diona team is more consistent, right? The buffs are just, they're there for a majority of the time, right? Like, they're not going to be down unless you're screwing with rotations really badly. Shenhe, right? The attack modifier is based on the number of hits, so that could vary greatly depending on how many enemies there are, right? And, of course, this could all be just bad playing, right? Like, maybe I'm just not good at Shenhe rotations yet, which is completely possible. I haven't played her very much, right? So that's fair. But generally speaking, I think that it makes sense that the normal Morgana comp is easier to play. There are some benefits though. Shenhe, of course, means that you don't have to run a Mona anymore, because you're not using Mona because your Hydra is going to be a healer instead, and Mona doesn't heal. It's hard to pull Mona, right? She's a standard banner character, she's never guaranteed. People have pulled an enormous amount and still don't have Mona. It's completely possible. But generally speaking, you're going to have Mona. She's a standard banner character, she's going to quote-unquote eventually drop, right? But if you don't have her now, Shenhe could be worth it, right? Now, something to keep note of is, of course, Kazuha is probably getting a rerun pretty soon. Kazuha is much better than Shenhe overall, right? He's way more versatile, he's pretty insane in terms of how much damage he brings to the team. He's really good, right? And if you look at the characters that have been rerun, Kazuha is like at this point the oldest character without a rerun, so he's probably getting one soon. So pulling Shenhe over Kazuha is probably a mistake, right? Now of course you could try to go for both, but if you're free to play and you burn all of your primos on this Shenhe banner, you're probably not getting Kazuha, right? Like if you lose a 50-50 or you just get unlucky, it's hard. So I wouldn't recommend it there. And yeah, I mean, overall, Shenhe's team's just more work to play, it's more expensive, right? You have to invest more into Shenhe's levels, talents, right? You kind of want a 5-star weapon for Shenhe, right? If you're running Kokomi, she can't run Favonius, so there's that. If you're running Ayaka with that, then, well, you're gonna have a lot less energy. So, yeah. Now, on the other hand, if you're running Cryo on both sides of Abyss, then suddenly Shenhe's pretty insane, right? Because you can't run Morgana on both sides, so you could run, like, you know, Melt Ganyu or something, but I think Melt Ganyu is even more of a pain to run than Shenhe teams. So, you could just run Morgana on one side and the Shenhe freeze comp on the other, and that's pretty good. If, you know, you don't have mana, or you are running both Cryo, then Shenhe's pretty damn good, and you should probably pull. Otherwise, it's debatable whether or not you should pull. Because of course, in the future, we could get more cryo DPSs, we will get more cryo DPSs, and they could benefit way more from Shenhe than the current cryo DPSs. And if that is the case, then, well, Shenhe would have been pretty nice to pull now. But of course, at that point, Shenhe probably gets a rerun, so you'd probably be fine, but yeah. In any case, if you need the Shenhe for your cryo teams, she's pretty decent. If you already have Morgana or you're not using cryo, then I don't think there's a reason to pull. But yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, comment down below if you have anything interesting to say. Subscribe to my channel for more Genshin Impact content. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.